Just really, just saying the same thing really about if children are born into like starvation or third world countries.
Yep.
I mean, they don't really have much will or much
I agree.
sense of a free will anyway.
I agree.
And I think a lot of people feel that, well, there isn't such a thing as free will because there's so many people on the planet who haven't got free will, i.e. children.
I agree.
You know, and then, you know, obviously up to the age of 7 where they're developing the will,
And even in the third world, sometimes they never have any sense of will through the rest of their life. Yeah.
So I think that's you know, it's just backing up what you're saying really there, but
yeah,
I think it's important for people.
We can even go further than what I've said in terms of look at it from a national perspective, from a nation and nation-based perspective. The reality is we have so-called the third world because the Western world are making certain choices and decisions and have done for thousands of years. So, for example, your own nation has been a conquering of the world type of nation in the past. Is that agreed? And there are still nations on earth that are willing to go and do this, you know, take over other nations, you know. The US government is quite okay with some of this, depending on whether they see their personal wealth being affected. Now, if you look at what's happening on a nation-by-nation basis, when we look at the third world, what we call the third world, let's call them the world's poor. The reason why they don't have enough resources is because the world's rich have enforced their will upon those. So the whole reason why this particular problem has occurred is because the world's rich have not had a loving use of their will. Because if they really loved the world's poor, they wouldn't use their will in the direction that's currently being used. Now, we also in Western countries need to see our personal part in this, because we vote in, usually, the people who make these choices and decisions. So we need to see how the choices and decisions we make, which are often economically based. In other words, if you, for instance, here in England, had a government decide they were going to give away half of your country's wealth to the third world, how many people do you think would vote for that government at the moment? See, there might be a few, but the majority of people go, but what does that mean about my wealth? That means my wealth might be halved. What? Surely there's another solution. And so oftentimes we would not individually support a government making such a choice or decision, right? And it is so really what that gets down to then, if we start taking away the rich as the cause of the decision, it really comes down to our personal decision as to why the poor exist. Doesn't it? Really, when you think about it collectively. It's our personal decision. Our personal decisions currently create the world's poor.
Well, one of the comments, what I often get is, you're not going to change the world, you know.
Well,
that all the time. Well, I think that you can do, of course, by use of your free will, basically.
Well,
and everybody else.
Let's look historically. 100 years ago here in England, were women allowed to vote? When was it that the vote actually came in for women here in England? Do any of you know? 1918 or somewhere. It was somewhere near the First World War, right? So before then, women were not considered to be any people that would be willing to be or even able to be involved in the government of the land. Now, that changed. How did it change? Throw herself under a horse. By people using their personal decisions to change their choices and decisions into be more harmonious with love. Now, some of those harmonious with love is they weren't that harmonious with love. They went into rebellion, and that's not harmonious with love. But if every man in England in 1914 decided, through the use of their will, that women are just as equal as men, would there have ever been a woman that needed to throw herself under a horse in order to get a vote? No. So this is where, again, it gets back to the loving use of our will. If collectively and individually we use our will in a loving manner, there will always be change. Always. And change is inevitable, in fact, while we use our will in a loving manner. I read an article just this week in one of your newspapers about the trouble that the Anglican Church is having losing members. So what they've done is the Anglican Church did a survey of the people who have left their church and found that the majority of the people who left their church still believed in God. And the majority of people who left their church still believed in the Bible. They just could not agree with the way in which the church was instigating many of the principles that came from the Bible, and so they could no longer go along to church. That's people using their will in a loving manner to show in this case, the institution of the church, that the way they're using their will is in an unloving manner. And none of them have attacked the church or been violent against the church or burnt the church or done any of these things. It's not a very English thing to do, with those things, right? But they've gone ahead and exercised it through the use of their will, just in terms of making a choice whether they go or not. And that is causing the church to look and decide what they're going to do with that, how they're going to change. So I don't agree that we can't change the world, but I feel quite strongly, in fact, that it's essential that we all understand we can change the world, but we can only do it by changing our personal decisions and choices to bring them into more harmony with love. Right? It's the only way we can do it.